All of us are eager to hear your thoughts on whether there would be another Olympics. I mean, you've had a real windy path to get to where you are today.
I was kind of tested and directed towards rowing, and it was 4 years before the Games, and I remember thinking, this is probably something that's not going to go anywhere.
Really?
I'm probably going to be rubbish at this. I met Heather Stanning, who was my pairs partner, and we just clicked really well together. And so when we were selected for 2012, we were suddenly favourites in our event to go and win the gold medal at a home game.
Hello, Helen.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It feels like a long time coming. I've wanted to chat to you for a long time about everything you've done and achieved and continue to juggle. Let's start with this year, because you've had an insane year. Have your feet touched the ground yet?
I think just about. They've just touched the ground. Now the kids have gone to school, I've kind of managed to look back and think, what on earth has just happened, and how did that just happen? So yeah, just now, just this last couple of weeks, I think it started to really settle in.
I mean, that's it, because like after the Olympics, you were just being a mum the next day. Like there's no, I'm going to have a week where I just chill and I think about everything that I've just been through with training and the actual Olympics. You're just then making breakfast and you're straight into the rhythm of being a mum. It's crazy.
Which weirdly helps me.
Do you
because,
think?
Yeah, I think when I look back to London and Rio and those Olympics, the next day or the next moment that you're back home and doing the dishes, it's just this nothingness, and everyone thinks that your life changes the moment you win an Olympic medal or something, and actually the essence of you and what your life is exactly the same. And so to have the kids and have to be mum and to have you to not be the most important person in the room because my kids are, is just really actually grounding and really important for me.
They don't care if you've won a medal or not. They're like, get me the cereal now.
Yeah, if their Weetabix isn't done right,
yeah,
you know about it.
We've all been there. I heard you interview just before Paris, and you said that you really wanted a medal. You were quite clear about that. Otherwise, why are you doing it? You wanted to come back with a medal. You came back with a silver. What was that feeling? Was it a contentment? Was it a relief? What were you feeling?
Probably a bit of both. I think I had always pictured my kids on the finish line and being there and getting out my boat and standing on the podium in front of them. And if I hadn't had that moment, I think I would have just been really devastated, because I think when I got to Tokyo, it was all about getting there as a mum and proving a point. And that point had been proven, that had been done. I really wanted to show that it wasn't just getting there, it was getting there and being good enough. And so, yeah, it was definitely a lot of relief and but also just this real satisfaction that I'd shared this moment with them.
Oh, it's so amazing. I mean, imagine when they're sort of 18 and you can sit back and watch it together as a family. Like, I'm projecting quite far into the future there, but it's so special.
I think so. But I mean, we made the mistake, though, of in the same week, they also went to Disneyland.
Oh, wow.
And so when they got back home, everyone was like, how was it, kids? And they were like, it was amazing. The rides were so good. And they were like, no, watching your mum at the Olympics, how was that?
Well, you're just their mum, aren't you? Like, that's it. It's always the most grounding thing, is that you're just their mum.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Mickey Mouse comes first in this occasion. Always. I mean, you've had a real windy path to get to where you are today. In terms of elite sport, you started rowing quite late. You were 21 when you discovered it. When you first got in a boat, was there this sort of affinity that you instantly felt with the sport?
Not really, no. I mean, when you first would have seen me, I looked like I was doing a totally different sport. But the way I got into it was through talent ID. So when London had been given the Games, they did a big talent ID drive. It was really for tall people. So handball, volleyball and rowing, it helps have long levers. And I was kind of tested and directed towards rowing. And it was 4 years before the Games. And I remember thinking, this is probably something that's not going to go anywhere.
Really?
I'm probably going to be rubbish at this. But it was the one time in my life that I was fully prepared. I realised, I think I had never actually given my all to anything. I'd never fully just immersed myself in something to be the best I can be. I'd really coasted through quite a lot of things in life. And I probably had the maturity kind of coming out of my teens and going, right, if you're going to do it, it has to be now. And so I didn't care if I enjoyed it. I didn't care if I started off any good at it, but I was going to give it my all.
That's such an interesting gear change, because would you say like your personality is all or nothing naturally?
I think it is now, but it probably wasn't before I met rowing.
But how interesting, because I think most of us assume that you turn up in the world and you have a set of traits that see you through life. But actually, you've cultivated that feeling of all or nothing. I'm all in on this.
I think so. I think there were some things that were really like intrinsically there. My competitiveness. I had a real grit to me when I was younger. I do remember vividly kind of doing cross country on rainy days or swimming galas where I was really fiercely competitive and I wanted to train hard and do these things. But the all or nothing mentality of really sticking at something and doing everything that needed to be done to be good at it, I don't think I really did until I found rowing. And now I'm probably much better at that. Now if I put my mind to something, I know I have the tools to go ahead and do it.
How do you stick at something that you're not instantly good at? Because I think most of the time when we start a new hobby or we want to try something for the first time, if we're not kind of okay at it straight away, we think, fuck that, I'm out. I don't want to do that. This is a waste of time. How do you push through that barrier of, I'm just going to see this through? I have it, for instance, with learning a language. I'm desperate to learn Spanish. And I get to a certain point and I think, I can't do all of the masculine, feminine stuff and the different you want, I want, they want. I'm out. I'm done. And I can't persevere. What gets you through that bit?
That's so true. I think for me, there were two things. One, it was the people around me. Because I went through this system, I was really lucky that I ended up with a coach who believed in me.
Right.
I was selected for that reason. He saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. And so Paul, my first coach, when I said to him, I just think I'm going to be a bit rubbish. I'm not the same as the other girls. I'm this, I'm that. And he just had this underlying belief that I could get there. So the people around you is really important. But the other thing that I think I take into life with me is it's so much better to try and fail than to never know. And I just think actually the end result doesn't matter as much as being able to look yourself in the mirror and go, I gave that a really good go.
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think you've got to have such mental resilience to keep that in mind when you're having a crappy day, when everything's going a bit wrong and you just think, what am I doing? And there's a temptation to maybe feel a bit lost in that. If you're not seeing direct results, you're not getting the results that you want. I think it's hard to stay on that. It's a very strict path that you've got to follow, especially in sport.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think that's where people need to be really kind to themselves, is that it doesn't always have to look from the outside like this linear progress, like you're always seeing outcomes and results. And I think if you can finish the day and know that you've given it your best, even if you haven't seen through everything that you hope to achieve that day, if you've not even given it your best, giving it a go, showing up, sometimes just turning up that day is enough.
Sometimes average is enough. And it's really hard to accept that. I hate accepting that one. I'm like, but I wanted it to be perfect. Like average is okay.
Yeah, just staying on that line, staying on that treadmill, just being there is sometimes enough. And just kind of at some point you have to trust that you'll emerge in just that tiny bit closer to your goal. And it will happen. Whatever your goal is, it will happen. You will make that small step. But I think if you can surround yourself with people who are a positive influence, that's always going to be a really important step.
Yeah, I need someone who believes I can speak Spanish in my life. Yeah. I'll get there. So at what point in this 4-year period leading up to London did you think, we could be in with a chance here?
It was about 2 years out. So for the first 2 years, I couldn't have been further from an Olympian. I was working as a PE teacher at the time to fund my training. It was so hard. And I look back now and I think that was definitely the hardest bit of that early part of my career. I was trying to beat girls on the team who were in full-time training. And I was trying to juggle my teaching at the same time. And then I met Heather Stanning, who was my pairs partner. And we just clicked really well together. And 2 years out from the Olympics, we started rowing together, went to a World Championships and honestly surprised everyone, including ourselves, by winning a silver medal. And from that point on, we were just on this mission. We couldn't quite believe that it was happening to us, but it clicked, it worked, and we didn't leave that combination. And so when we were selected together for 2012, we were suddenly favourites in our event to go and win the gold medal at home games. And so very quickly our trajectory had just totally changed.
It's incredible. I mean, you went into that Olympics pretty anonymous,
Yeah,
which you don't have the luxury of these days. You were flag bearer. This time round, all eyes on you. Was it liberating going in, having no one really looking at what you were doing? That yes, there's maybe some expectations from, the Team GB and your coaches and everyone knowing your potential, but to the wider audience, people don't know who you are, what you're capable of. Is that freeing?
Oh, and it was so intentional as well. If any interviews came our way, we turned them down. We just, you can only be an underdog once, and so we wanted to go into it as the underdogs. And like you say, really the only people who had expectation of us were the people who know about rowing, and it was that small bubble of people who follow the sport and who knew that we were on a winning streak. But actually, going into a home games, we had enough pressure as it was, and so it just felt about right. Going in with a little bit of pressure, but mainly excitement. And I mean, that definitely changed when we came up to the day of our final on day 5, because we hadn't won as a Team GB. We hadn't won a gold medal, and so going into it knowing that we were hoping to be the first gold for Team GB, we were just hoping to kind of just get away with it, just race, hopefully win, and just be one of many. And at that point, it hadn't happened. So the pressure definitely shifted on that morning, because we realised that people were being told to tune in, were being pushed our direction to watch for the first gold. And so that definitely, we kind of wanted to be like, no, we're doing this quietly, remember?
Oh my God. But does that then give you an extra surge of motivation and strength to get the gold? Or are there points where it's just so overwhelming? Like, how, when you're on that start line and you know that people are tuning in, you know that there's this pressure that you could be the first home gold medal, how the bloody hell do you get in the headspace where you're just rowing and you just block that out?
Yeah, so we definitely, rather than kind of stepping into it, we retracted from the reality of the Olympic Games. So we convinced ourselves so fully that this was not the Olympic Games. The last thing our coach said to us before we went on the water was, this is just another race.
Wow.
You're racing the same girls in the same boats on a piece of water. Just go and race. And in that moment, it really helped my headspace. It normalised the situation totally for me. But when I finished the race, I couldn't call myself Olympic champion. I just done another race. I hadn't raced in an Olympic final. I did not believe it, because I had so fully convinced myself it was just another race. And I remember that whole Olympic Games, the rest of the Olympic Games, just being like this out-of-body experience, just feeling like I can't have just... I could not call myself Olympic champion for about 6 months afterwards.
6 months?
Yeah. I remember the moment it hit me. I just remember it really vividly. I was sat on the panel for a question of sport, and they played the titles and they kind of announced me as Olympic champion. And for some reason, I think because I'd watched it since I was little, that was the moment where I went, they're talking about me. And it was around Christmas time, so it must have been about 6 months after the Games. And it just hit me that I was an Olympic champion, but I had normalised the situation so much. It's what I needed to do, though. It was how I was going to cope.
I think it's a healthy thing to do, because, like you said right at the start of this chat, in ways, nothing changes. You're doing the washing up the next day. And yes, you have that moment of euphoria. You've won the first gold medal in a home Olympic Games, but there is still washing to be done, and there is still food to be bought in the supermarket, and life does go on. And I don't know how you're meant to cope with that, but obviously your way was just to go, it's too surreal to process.
Yeah, exactly. It was almost, I guess it's avoidance. But I think also because my route in had been so quick as well, I was still processing the fact that I was a rower and an Olympian and then Olympic champion in such a small space of time. So my transition from London to Rio was really different in that I had so much more time to process what I was and what I was hoping to achieve. And so I had definitely I had compartmentalised it all and kind of sorted it all in my brain by the time I'd got to Rio.
And do you celebrate things more now? So when you got a gold in Rio, for instance, were you able to actually really enjoy that moment and go, yes, a gold medal in my hands? Exactly.
Yeah. So that just, I felt present. I felt like I had earned it. I felt like it belonged to me. Because I had just, I had fully kind of given myself to that experience and allowed myself to believe that that was me in that moment, rather than kind of avoiding those feelings. It definitely made the run up to Rio far less enjoyable. I felt the pressure so much more. I really didn't enjoy the experience of being out in Rio in the build up. with the pressure, with the expectation, with the language around the way we were racing, because again, we were favourites, and the language was almost as if we didn't need to race because we had already won. And it was like anyone could beat us. When you're on the start line, you're so vulnerable. You don't get a head start just because you won the last race. And so I found myself getting really frustrated with the language used around us. And actually it was lovely and it was really complimentary. But I was like, stop talking like that.
Yeah.
Make people believe that we could lose, because we could. And I didn't like that. I felt like we were being set up for a fall. If we didn't win, it would have been a loss, a big loss. And so I didn't particularly enjoy it, but it definitely made the win feel a bit sweeter, that we had kind of really come through that.
God, that pressure. I mean, the pressure of, I think this is what people perhaps underestimate. The pressure of being the best at something is so immense. It's so immense. Because like you say, if you're not then the best on any given occasion, it is a huge loss. Whereas if you are the underdog or you're unknown, anything's a plus. And it has such a different flavour to it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And also, it also is slightly reductive in terms of how much hard work you've had to put in to get to that point to be the best. Like, oh, they'll just win. Oh my God, 4 years of grueling training to get to that point. It feels quite reductive to talk about it in that way.
And I think that's why the older I've got, and I don't know if it's that I've got older, that I've spent more time in sport, that I've got kids, probably a bit of everything. I think my perspective on success has totally shifted, and what success is for me definitely looks far less like medals. But it sounds really cheesy, but the journey is really, really important. How you get there, what you represent, what you're doing along the way, what you're changing along the way is so much more important to me. Because if I had ended my career, so I ended my career after Rio, and if I had just left it there, I would have been really proud of what I had done. But I've done more in the last 2 Olympics than I have in those first 2. And I think that for me, that shift in perspective of what's important and what it means is really different.
Without a doubt. I mean, we haven't even got onto the juggle of it all. And it's so, I find this conversation a tricky one in ways, because whenever I've heard you interviewed before, people are almost obsessional when talking to women who are elite athletes who happen to also be mums. It becomes this huge topic where we become hungry for like how do you do it, and what's the juggle like, and how are you achieving so much. And I think I feel these conflicting emotions of awe, because I am in awe of what you're able to do, but frustration because we don't ask male athletes these questions. There is this absolute blanket coverage assumption that if a male athlete is training or racing, the mother will be at home looking after the kids. We don't even ask them, like, oh, how's the juggle? How are you managing your children and your amazing sporting career? With women, we're obsessed with how it's done. How do you feel about that?
I think that it's a really important conversation to keep having, because the moment we stop having it, even if we stop having the conversation for the right reasons, because we say, no, we shouldn't keep asking this because we're not asking the men, or because it should always be assumed that women can do it, then it stops highlighting that actually it's not just there as an option for everybody.
Nope.
It's not easy, and it's not put in place in the way that it could be. So I do think it's really important to be. And people do say to me, oh, do you start to feel that, motherhood is sort of, should it always go hand in hand in this kind of second half of your career? And I just think absolutely it should, because it's a massive reason why I came back. It's a huge driver for me. Originally, it was all about kind of proving it can be done. And then it was about kind of doing it with my family and with my kids. But I think there's a really, really kind of fine line that I've always been careful to tread in it, which is, I think, I want to champion the fact that women can go back and do whatever they want to do when they've had kids. But I also think that not everybody should want to. I never want anyone to ever feel less than because they don't go either back to work or back to their hobbies or passions. There's so many different routes that everyone should take. And I think the most important thing is that the option is there.
But that's so important in this conversation. I think sometimes when we're talking about this subject, it's taken in such a black and white fashion that it's like, oh, well, all women have to find their passion afterwards. And of course, we're all different. Some people, their whole life is they want to be a mum and that feels right for them. And that's amazing. And equally, you can go back if you've got the right support and people around you to enable you to go and fulfill your dreams and passions. There's no right or wrong. It's just like you say, the option is so important. And one of the things that, one of the main barriers for women going back to work or carrying on with a career or a passion, like, let's use the word passion. Like, I feel like we're not allowed to say that we want to do something. It has to be like, I need to go back to work. If you really want to go back and do something because you absolutely bloody love it, one of the main barriers is support. That's the hugest problem here. I mean, you have managed to juggle this with your husband. Brilliant, Steve Backshaw, who we're all absolutely obsessed with and in love with. You have this amazing communicative relationship where he's away at the moment, you're juggling at home. Whilst you were doing the Olympics, he had the kids. How much compromise is involved? How do those conversations go? How are you managing to juggle that?
It's a huge amount of compromise, and I think it would only ever work in the short term. So for this Paris Olympics, I was only back at training for 18 months before the Games, because it was a shorter Olympic cycle because of COVID.
Yeah.
And around the Tokyo Olympics, I did a lot of my training from home. And then again, it was only maybe 9 months that I was kind of back in full-time training. Any more than that, I mean, he was having to make huge sacrifices with his job and with his work. And it's not sustainable long-term for both of us to kind of have a career on hold. And so it's kind of like, I've almost found a solution because I've shown that it's possible to do, but it's not a practical solution in terms of going back long term and being able to afford childcare and things like that. So, yeah, the number one, the fact that he was on board enough to say, "Yep, I'll step up and I'll help out." Number two, the fact that he has a job that he can be flexible with, but it was it definitely has a timeline how much you can have that flex. So now he's got 18 months worth of work to make up for. Now I'm back home, so it's definitely tricky. And I think finding like childcare is definitely always been our number one thing. It's just really tricky, expensive, difficult, inflexible. That's been definitely challenging for us. But also I think the change, the shift within society, within language, within sport, within community is something that's really important as well. And I think that to be supported as a parent, not just supported but wanted, is really crucial. Not just feeling like you're ticking a box, or whether it's work or sport or whatever it is, they're ticking a box by having you back and showing that. I think when you have children, in so many ways, you have so much more to give.
Oh, I agree.
There's just, I don't know what it is, but something changes in you, and something is available that wasn't there before, I think, in so many ways. And I think to tap into that and for people to realise that and see that they could tap into it as well, I think it's a missed opportunity if it's not used.
I agree. I don't think motherhood's necessarily talked about in that way, that there's like additional benefits that come with the experience of being a parent. It's almost like the loss is so much bigger, like what you lose, but actually what you gain in terms of the levels of patience that you have to cultivate and your ability to deal with no sleep. Like, how, you've had to really dig deep with that one, having 3 young kids, 2 are twins, having no sleep and then getting up and doing a grueling training schedule. That's something that perhaps you couldn't have done, say, when you were training for London.
Definitely. Like, Heather always used to laugh at me. She was like, Helen, when you have kids, I do not know how you're going to cope, because I used to, between sessions, I used to nap. If we got on a bus, I would sleep. I am a napper. Like, if I was on a bus, I was sleeping. If I was on a plane, I was sleeping. Like, we used to share a bedroom when we were away on training camp. And honestly, every time she walked into the room, she'd just walk out again because I would just be asleep. Like, she's like, I've never seen someone sleep as much. And when you have kids, I don't know how you're going to cope. And I don't know what, I was scared for myself as well. But yeah, I so when the kids were born, I used to, you have a few hours of broken sleep and then you go in to train and do 3 sessions with everyone else who's had full night sleep and naps, and the ability to just keep going. It's
mad.
Yeah.
You look back and you think, I mean, you're still sort of in the thick of it because your kids are pretty young still, but you look back and you think, how the hell I remember turning up to do this terrifying job. It was at the Albert Hall. I was so nervous. It was like a big children in need thing. And my kids were really small. I think Rex was maybe 3. And he'd woken me up at, say, like 3, half 3, and hadn't gone back to sleep. And I was lying there going, this is a nightmare. I can't do this thing tomorrow. My brain's not going to operate. And somehow, I worked till about midnight that night, and somehow you just do it. And you don't feel like you're capable, but there's something within you, and you wouldn't even bother to probably try and flex those muscles if you didn't have to, if you weren't a mother. But actually you are able to bring that resilience into another part of your life and showcase it.
Yeah, exactly. And I did find it in training. I found myself just being able to just carry on, and just I didn't feel like complaining. I just would be out there in the boat just keeping on going, and a bit like that sleep thing, you just show up and you just turn up and you just keep going, and it's just something in you that just allows you to keep going. Yeah,
it's remarkable. I do think, I mean, it's an amazing setup you've got at the moment. Like you say, might not be long term. You found a solution that all we can do is be in the day and just go, right, how's tomorrow going to work?
Yeah.
I think in this conversation, and I live and breathe this one too, men are still sort of overly celebrated when they decide to support the wife, the woman, the mother going back to work. Whereas it's such a given that mums will potentially press pause on their career and the men go back as they did maybe even the day after the kid's, been born. That still feels like there needs to be some movement there. Something needs to change, because we're still like, oh my God, the guy didn't go to work. I can't believe this. It's still almost shocking to hear sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. I think the fact that it's just this given, the fact that, if a guy turns up at work, nobody would say, but where's the baby? And of course, there are lots of practical reasons for that. And of course, there are those things. And I think especially in sport where there's lots of physical, when you go through pregnancy and you're breastfeeding and things like that, there are lots of physical reasons why there would be a question mark over you coming back. And that is understandable. But I think that, I guess in my situation, when Steve said, yeah, you go for it, mine isn't so much a career, it is a passion. So actually there was that kind of like, you go, you do that thing. It's a gamble as well, because there's no guaranteed results at the end of it. So I can see why for him it was a big leap of faith.
Yeah, I mean, that's more pressure for you then, because you're like, oh shit, if I've said you've got to press pause on your career, I better do all right with this next, coming up Olympics.
I did actually feel a bit of pressure. I felt he never, put pressure on me in terms of saying it, but very clearly I had made this big thing of going, I want to make it worth it by winning a medal in front of my kids, and actually it comes to the moment, the day, and you think, I've got to make it happen now.
I can't even imagine. It's insane, the pressure. But again, it's fueling you in that moment to give it your absolute all. The thing that there's like a grey area of, did you after Rio say, right, I'm kind of done? Or I felt like the commentary around you was deciding that for you at times. It wasn't like you'd gone, oh, hi everyone, that's my last Olympics, I'm going to have children now. It was almost like, oh, and she's having kids, so she's not coming back to the
sport. Okay, I'm so glad you picked up on that, because that's how
I don't know the answer to it.
Yeah, that's how I felt. So I never actually announced retirement, and I just kind of, for a year or two, lots of people would often have a year or two out after the games. I knew I wanted to start a family, and the day after I had Logan was basically the last time I'd ever be asked if I was going to go back into sport. It was just like that, for that year or two, any time I did an interview, the interviewer would say, what do you think about Tokyo? Are you going to carry on? And I would say, oh, I don't know. I definitely want to have a family. But yeah, never asked again. And it just felt like this natural way of retiring, and almost like this, I just been pushed into the slipstream of retirement without actually having the kind of, I guess at that time I also maybe didn't have I wasn't self-assured enough. I didn't have the belief that I would actually even consider carrying on when I'd had a kid. I just felt like, oh, well, if that's what happens now, that's what I do. Which I feel strange saying that now, because I've had to be very sure of myself in some ways over the last few years, but I didn't possess that then. I don't think I didn't possess that ability to just believe that I could do something differently.
Which says so much about how we all probably feel this undercurrent of societal pressure to fit in with what we're told happens either after you've had kids or when you get to a certain age. I think that comes into it as well, that we just go, oh yeah, this is kind of what happens then. Yeah. And you don't actually make the decision for yourself. And I think so many of us in all areas of life go down that slipstream that you've just talked about, whether it is retirement or it's I can't do this any longer because I'm a certain age or I've got kids. At what point did you think, I'd quite like to challenge that?
Yeah, age was definitely a part of it as well. I think there's just this sort of, you're out of this bracket and so therefore you move on. And it had never actually been openly discussed with me, but there was just this feeling, I guess, this expectation. And so 4 years I was out of the boat, and I'd had my oldest in 2018. In 2020, I had the twins, and it was exactly at the time of COVID. So I had newborn twins and an 18-month-old as we went into COVID, and the only bit of fitness equipment in the house was a rowing machine. So I kind of got back on the rowing machine just to keep fit. And I was fully expecting to watch the Tokyo Olympics with my babies on the sofa that summer, and then the Olympics got postponed. And I suddenly had a year ahead of me in lockdown in the house with the kids and a rowing machine and the potential to make it back. And at the time when I first started going back, it's just like this annoying athlete trait you have, which you get back on a rowing machine and you think you're really good again. I was like, you should have ignored my scores, but I just kept thinking, yeah, I've still got it. And but then day on day, I just kept going, and it actually the sound of the rowing machine lulled the twins to sleep. So every time it was time for their nap, I just put them by the fan of the rowing machine, and it sent them to sleep. It was a bit like a heartbeat sound, you know. So
genius.
Yeah. So it was kind of this way of getting them to nap, allowing me to do some exercise. And after a couple of months, my scores were getting really quickly back up to what they used to be. And I just started thinking, and I was like, I wonder that one of the biggest barrier had definitely been the fact that you had to go into training. And I'd never wanted to leave my children when they were this young. You know, I'd had a couple of years with my oldest at this point, and I didn't want to leave the twins. But I just thought, under the shadow of lockdown, I could just start training. And I could just see if I'm good enough to get back on the team, and no one needs to know. And so I trained for a few months. And then at around the Christmas time, I was doing really well. So it was about 5 months before the games, and I announced that I was going to try and make a comeback and be the first woman to make it to the games as a rower. And I mean, it was, I honestly can't explain the kind of outpouring of support from the parent community. And it's something that I'd never really had that village before. So I had, you know, the twins in lockdown, and Logan, who was a toddler, but I'd never really found that tribe. I'd never really found that support. I'd never really felt what it means when parents get behind parents. And when I had this announcement that I was going back, maybe it was because it was lockdown and there hadn't been many stories. It was a slow news day or something, but it was just so unexpected. My inbox was just full and full and full of messages of parents, both mums and dads, or just, you know, grandparents, people just saying thank you, and we're all behind you. This is what I want my little girl to see. We're supporting you. And honestly, from that moment, it changed from being something that was all about, you know, what can I do to show, you know, can I show my little girl something? Can I prove something to the system? It became far bigger than that, and just about kind of, I guess, that wider community that had shown massive support to me.
That is so amazing. It's so amazing, and it's so beautiful. So I think most, probably all women would feel that after they've had kids, there is this natural loss of identity, which will last for differing periods of time, depending on your circumstance and level of support and where your head's at that point. I absolutely felt that. I felt like I didn't have a clue what I liked anymore. A lot of the time that was sort of, I would be confused as to, like, do I really want to do this and like it? The guilt feels so huge that I actually can't even action it, so I'm going to park it. My kids are now 9 and 11, and my stepkids are adults, but they're 9 and 11, and I honestly only feel this year that I'm properly back in the flow of, today I have got the day off work and I'm going to paint, and I want to do that for me without guilt, without worry. I've probably got a bit more headspace at this point with their ages. They're at school for the weekdays and sometimes after school clubs, so I can be a little bit more relaxed about my timekeeping. And I feel like I'm coming back to myself in a way. Like the old me is coming back, but with more maturity and wisdom. It's taken me a long time. There have obviously been sort of glimmers of it along the way, and I've been lucky enough to work on off throughout being a parent and finding support in different ways. But I think it's the internalized bit of like wondering who you are at this point and how you've changed, and whether it's for the better or which bits of you have fallen by the wayside. This was quick for you in terms of I'm setting myself this goal, but at what point did you start feeling like, oh yeah, the old me, the elite athlete is coming back into this body and this mindset?
That's such a good question, because I think when the way you described that is something that I still think I do feel now.
Yeah.
Even though I've had this massive thing just happened to me, just been at the Olympic Games, I still think, my twins are 4 and the older one's 6. And so, but I still feel in that phase of kind of discovering who I am and what I want and where I'm at. And so I think even though I've done this big thing, it doesn't mean it's given me this huge anchor. But I do think it's made me a better parent in terms of giving me that identity. And I compare it to when I wasn't rowing and I had my toddler, and then having the twins and getting back to rowing. I think that I was a much more present parent because I kind of compartmentalized my life. And when I was at training, I was there for the shortest time possible. I was in and out, I was getting it done, but I was getting it done with quality. I was present and I was going to make the most of that time so that when I stepped away from it, I would totally detach. And then when I got home, I think I felt energized. And I think partly that's because of exercise. And I think I probably am someone that needs exercise to get those endorphins and lift. But I think for my mental health, it was really important, that identity. And I could really throw myself into parenting. And I think that it's definitely not something that everybody needs. And I see some of my friends parenting day to day with just this amazing consistency and this amazing ability to be present. But for me, I found the stepping back in a real kind of powerful moment, that I'd given myself this kind of reminder of who I am outside of the house as well.
Yeah, I'm the same. I need something creative to remind me of who I am. I think it's that simple, just a reminder of, oh yeah, because obviously, like, I feel like I have to say the disclaimer of like, being a parent is a privilege and it's amazing and there's so many beautiful parts of it, but a lot of it is really mundane. Mm-hmm. And you are doing stuff on repeat, and sometimes it's thankless a lot of the time, and sometimes it's totally and utterly exhausting mentally, emotionally, physically. So to have something that really boosts you outside of that, if that is what you want, as we keep saying, if that floats your boat, I've just used the pun there, sorry guys, without even realising it, but that is deeply important to give you that sort of balance, and I think perspective, that when you step back into it, you do feel re-energised, and that you can step into that space gratefully.
Exactly, yeah, being grateful. And I think every single time I would come back, I was grateful not only for the fact that I was able to go and do this thing I wanted to do, but grateful every time I walked back home and being, just, I guess, reassessing how lucky I am and how great this actually is. But when I did notice that if I stayed in it too long, I think my perspective shifted, and I definitely found it harder to be the parent that I wanted to be.
Yeah. I mean, so you met Steve in 2014. At some point you decide this is what you want to do. You want to start a family. At that point, knowing how the sporting world works, knowing how your body might change, and, just the practicalities of life after having kids, did you have a moment where you thought about the impact it would have on not only your career, but your passion and your identity?
I think before having kids, I never, ever thought about what happens next. It was just something that I knew I wanted to have a family, and the timeline goes like this. And after Rio, it was a very sensible time. It was like a sensible time to retire and to have a family and to do all these things. You know, I didn't really think about what I do next. And I think that I expected to maybe fall into things a bit more, things to naturally happen a bit more, like not having to make big decisions, like going back to the Olympics and things like that. I don't know. I think that thinking about how you're going to feel when you're a parent is really hard, because it's something which I found it quite alien. You know, I didn't know lots of people who had children. I wasn't around lots of children who were kind of in my like inner circle, really. So kind of those discussions around your body changing or actual childbirth or anything like that, I just had never really had before.
Well, also it's nothing like you think it's going to be anyway. It's almost pointless having that like imagined projection of the future, because it's just not how you think it's going to be.
Yeah, I know. We went to the NCT classes and things like this, but actually you can't prepare every single person for every single eventuality and what life is going to bring or how you're going to feel about anything. So yeah, I think that I don't know if I could have done anything differently to plan for how I was going to feel, except for probably, I would say, being a bit more open to, I think if COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have got back into rowing, but I would have liked to have thought that I would have had the confidence to find something to bring me what rowing brings me, which is just like feeling like myself and being the best parent I can be.
And then twins. Talk to me about having twins.
Well, I'm a twin myself, and so actually my mum was pretty much on speed dial for the whole time.
Oh my God, I hope. That's great.
But you know what? It's not doubly as hard, I don't think.
Really?
Yeah, and actually in some ways there are definitely moments that are much easier. I found that when they were newborns, it's hard because I was breastfeeding them both, and I remember actually I had to wean them off because I had to go to the European Championships to compete, and they were still feeding, and they got to 14 months, and I was thinking, I thought they were just going to, Logan stopped at 12 months, he just stopped, and they kept going, and I was thinking, I've got to fly out to Italy in a week. They were slowly stopping. They eventually stopped feeding, and I remember being out in Italy and in between races expressing in the shower because I was like, this is too much. But yeah, I was rowing with a girl called Polly at the time, and she was just laughing at me. She's like, every time we race, his boobs are a different size.
Oh my! I mean, this is just again all so mind blowing. You're about to take part in this high pressured race, and you've got to worry about essentially your boobs going rock hard because you haven't expressed enough.
I was thinking, imagine if anyone I'm racing knows what I'm doing right now. But yeah, all part of the process, all unknown world for me. But yeah, it was a very, very surreal part of the whole experience.
It's unbelievable. I remember doing Top of the Pops Christmas once, and my daughter was maybe, I don't know, like 2-3 months old, and I'd brought her to the studio, and I was sort of like doing a bit to the camera, running out, breastfeeding, and there was a bit where we were filming, and I was like, guys, I'm going to have to stop you here because I could feel it was like leaking. They were like 2 hard rocks. I was like, oh, I've got to get out of here now. And the panic of like everyone looking at you, and oh my God, it's a nightmare. Oh, but twins, I can't even imagine. It's
but the thing is, when
a whole other thing.
I felt like as soon as they got to toddler age and they started to play with each other, like that's when it changed, because they would actually entertain each other. And I think that's the thing I found hardest when it was just me and one child, was that you're their world, their entertainment, and you're kind of like putting on full theatre productions for them. Whereas actually when it was the two of them, they did interact with each other a lot. And actually they still do. If it's the two of them together, it's much easier than one on their own because they bounce off each other. Yeah. So as soon as they're out of that baby phase, I found having twins actually not significantly harder than one.
It's such a lovely bond for them as well.
Yeah, it's lovely. And they're really different. They're a boy girl as well.
Yeah.
But they're really different, so they don't kind of encroach in each other's territory too much.
Well, that's good. Yeah. They've got some sort of like unwritten understanding of how it all works.
Although I think they might be rebelling against each other. Like they're kind of as different as can be at the moment. So
that's so sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I loved the book that you wrote with Steve about getting kids out in nature and parenting in a different way. I mean, we say different way. It's basically parenting like people did in the 70s, which we've come so far from. We're in this weird territory now where screens are stuck in front of kids to sort of pacify them so we can do the cleaning or whatever it might be, but the balance is tipping into probably not great territory. And you both seem extremely passionate about making sure that kids are outside, getting dirty, camping, playing in trees. Was that ever a discussion you had? Or, I mean, I'm imagining we both know what your passions are. It was just a great fit that you both wanted to parent in the same way.
I think so, yeah. We both wanted to parent in the same way in terms of being outdoors. We're definitely not, I mean, we have screen time, like the kids will watch TV, they'll do something on the iPad. But something we wanted to do with that book is, I think we very much realised that a skill set both Steve and I have is the ability to just be really comfortable, to go outside and be in nature. And that actually, for a lot of people, that is... I guess you exert more energy, whether it's mental energy, physical energy, practical things you need, knowing how to do it, what to do on a rainy day, what to do by the beach. And so we thought, and I think when I had the kids, I remember thinking, what do I do with you? What do I do today? Because suddenly your brain can go to fog.
I have it all the time. I had it this weekend, like, what do I do with
people
my own children on a Saturday and I don't want to go to Westfield? What do I do?
Exactly.
Like, you just feel freaked out.
Yeah, exactly. And I always have this thing of what do people do? And so we wrote this book just essentially to go, what do people do in the outdoors? And it's from very, very simple things, from blackberry picking to building a den to and kind of wherever you are in the country, you could open the book and I hope find something that just shortcuts that what on earth do we do to go, well, let's just do this. And I would just love to think that it can be kind of something that sits on your bookshelf and is a really great kind of go-to, kind of whenever you get that thought of, I know we need to go outside, but I can only do so many walks to the park. Mm-hmm. And you can still walk to the park, but make it a bit different by doing this as we go. Yeah. Hopefully it'll kind of help families get outside more.
It's lovely. It's a beautiful guide, and it's just an essential reminder that we just need to get kids out in nature, just touching and feeling and looking at stuff and spying newts in streams and picking blackberries, like you say. It's just, we've got to get back to basics and get the balance back. Because, screens are inevitable. They're being introduced into schools now, which I feel slightly conflicted about, but we know that's becoming a bigger part of life. So I think where we can counter it, it's just so important. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm the first to say, if I need to at home, I will go, right, kids, you're watching a film because I've got to do the laundry and I've got to do the cleaning and I've got to do this and that. And I don't feel guilt around that. But I also know that sometimes if they're getting edgy or they're kicking off, actually the solution will be, let's get outside. And then suddenly the mood changes.
Yeah.
So I think there's space for both, there's room for both, but both should be really enjoyed by all families.
I agree. It's a bloody great book. This is the most obvious question ever, but before I say goodbye to you, I think all of us are eager to hear your thoughts on whether there would be another Olympics.
I don't know. When I was going towards Paris, I really thought it would be my last. But I'm not sure now. I think that... So when I always thought that my body would tell me when I had had enough. I would either get ill or injured, or just my performance would decline. And that hasn't happened. And when I was going to Paris, I was actually in the best shape I've ever been. And in a way, that's frustrating because I know
you're like, oh shit, I've got to do it again.
Part of me thinks I could go again, but then it has to be for the right reason. So I'm definitely not going back anytime soon. I'm going to take time out. If I stay fit and if I stay fit enough, I'll see whether I want to go back in a couple of years' time. It's not a no. It's not not right now. I don't know.
Because we've ticked off the list. You've stood on the podium and your kids have seen you. Like, we've done that. That's fantastic. Amazing to do it again. But you have done it. Is it enough to? I believe it is, to say, but it's a pressure for you. I want to show women of all ages that you can do this with your body. And actually, you can keep setting yourself goals and give things a try. Is that enough?
I love that. I really love it. I'd love to kind of represent people as they get told they're too old for something, or told they're not right for something, or told they're too this or too that. I don't think you're too anything. If you're good enough, you're tall enough, you're short enough, you're old enough, you're anything enough. So there is this sense of me that wants to kind of keep going to prove a point, but I don't know if that's a good enough reason to keep going. So I think over the next year or two, I'm going to have to work out, if I went back, why would I go back? And like you say, what result would I be looking for? What would the end goal be? Because I am really content with my career. But I never thought I would walk away from the chance to go to an Olympic Games. So I don't know.
Well, I'm excited to just see what unfurls, and I'm sure that you'll continue to surprise us all. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Thank you.
Helen, it's been such a joy talking to you. And once again, just a massive congratulations on this amazing sporting year.
Thank you so much.